So here is the screw that I was waiting on from Toyota. Yes, this teeny tiny little screw is the reason that I've not been able to complete my transmission reinstallation and not been able to drive my truck essentially. So now that I have this, which only took them 2 weeks to get for God only knows what reason, like did they have to manufacture it? I don't know, but anywho, I finally have the part that I need, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this into my transmission, and finally I should be able to get the transmission back inside the truck. So this bolt is 17 millimeter, and if I had to guess, it's probably Loctited in there, so I'm gonna go ahead and heat it up a little bit. Not even waste any time. Let's see if we can't get it out. There we go. Easy peasy. And actually, not really any evidence of Loctite. Looks like it was just on there. Put the new guy in. You know what? I'll Loctite this one just in case with blue Loctite. Alright, so I've got a little bit of blue Loctite here. Let's shake that up. Put a dab of it on there. And go ahead and thread it in. Alright. Give it a little love. And there you go. I don't think that'll go anywhere. Ever. Actually. Finally together, and I can go ahead and put the transmission up inside the truck. So my transmission is back in, as you can see. Now, unfortunately, there was really not a good way to film this. Like, all you would have seen is a view of two dudes under here wrestling with this thing. But basically, what we did is I came in through the driver's side over there, laid down with my head here toward the passenger side. I'd had the transmission laying on the floor there. My buddy was in through the front, right? So his head was around this area here, and basically we both first got the rear of the transmission up until this cross member, and once it was there, which by the way you have to turn the transmission because it has a chunky section which if you don't put it in sideways will make it hit the top of the transmission tunnel and you can't push it further back. So we did it sideways, pulled it back. We then realized that this rubber isolator on the transmission mount, you want that to be off. And as a matter of fact, just take the whole transmission mount all the way off when you're doing this, because otherwise it's going to be in the way. And with it on there, you'll never be able to line the transmission properly at the bell housing, right? Like the input shaft will never go in properly through the pilot bearing. So what you want to do is have this completely out. Get the transmission up over this cross member first. Bell housing is going to be on the floor. Then come around the other side, pick up the bell housing, and really you want one guy guiding the bell housing, the other person kind of supporting this center heavy section. If it's just you by yourself, maybe use a jack. But yeah, basically you're going to do that, and with this tail free to freewheel, you can basically get the input shaft to line properly, and you'll notice it because you'll push it in and the bell housing will come really close to bottoming out. It won't go all the way, but you'll be able to put one of the bolts through and it will thread, and that will allow you to start putting all the bolts in and pulling it toward the back of the engine block. So that's what we did. Once it was, I put in all the top bolts as well as the lower stiffener plate bolts, it's called. I tightened them all down, and that pulled the transmission all the way in. And then I basically went around reconnecting my O2 sensors, my speedo cable right here. I put my drive shaft back in, which basically you just lift it up, pop it in the back of the transmission tail shaft, and then you go back there and you put that center bearing up and put the bolts through. All right. Key things to keep in mind is the stiffener plate bolts, which are those lower transmission two bolt blocks basically. Those get torqued to 27 foot-pounds. The transmission cross member mount, whatever the heck, basically this thing, it has 4 bolts, 2 going there and 2 coming in from the bottom. Those go to 43 foot-pounds. And then the little bolts that go actually to the transmission mount, so that's like those 4 bolts here, I want to say, those are all 13 foot-pounds. And I want to say the upper ones too that hold the tail of the transmission to this rubber isolator thing and its metal bracket are probably also 13 foot-pounds, just guessing off the Haynes manual. Either way, tighten them down nice and tight, shouldn't go anywhere. The other things to keep in mind is you're going to want to pop your exhaust bracket back on. I don't have it on yet, right? I bolted the other section that goes on the transmission. I got to make sure I slide this clamp up onto it and tighten it down. Then basically once that's done, your transmission's in, run your harness, connect your reverse sensor, connect your O2 sensors to that harness. There's actually, so you can see one of the O2 sensors there, and the other one is over here in the front. See that other little pigtail back there? They're connected to the same harness. There's 2 sections. A shorter section goes to the front one. The longer section goes to the rear one, obviously. They have the same exact plugs, so don't do it backward. I mean, you won't be able to get the short one to reach the back and realize you've made a mistake and you'll have to swap it anyway, but just a heads up. Once you've done all of that, you also want to go ahead and put your starter back on and your slave cylinder back on, right? Both of those bolts of the transmission as well. Once those are in place, then, and everything's torqued down to spec, then you can go ahead and put fluid in your transmission, which I've not done yet, and I will show you how I do that. You want to put your shifter back on, and once your shifter is reinstalled, fluid is in there, everything has been buttoned down to the correct torque, you can go ahead and turn the vehicle on and take a little test drive, see how it feels. Another key heads up is those bolts on the top of the transmission bell housing to motor that go to 53 foot-pounds. There is no way on earth that you are getting a torque wrench in that space. The only one that you really can access with torque wrench is the one by the starter. I got that one to 53. I kind of tighten it by hand as much as possible, then hit it with the torque wrench till it reached 53. I got a feel for how tight that is, and basically did that to all the other bolts, which is actually only 2 other bolts on top. Maybe I can figure something out with like a flex driver to get my torque wrench, to access those, but it's really difficult, and you probably have to come in through the bottom and have someone like a spotter up top guiding your wrench, which I think is how I did it for my buddy's truck. But in any case, I want to say the first time I did this, I just tightened them exactly as I mentioned at the beginning, and it was fine. Your mileage may vary. I always recommend you torque everything to the correct torque. But ultimately, your truck, your safety, your life, you make up your mind. I can hit 53 foot-pounds by hand really, really easily. Maybe you can't, your size and strength play a factor into that as well. Again, my personal recommendation, always follow the instructions, always torque things to the correct specs. The engineers came up with that spec for a reason. That is what you should do. So do that. So with pretty much everything else installed, including your starter, which you, as I mentioned, you can do through your driver's side wheel well, you also want to put your slave cylinder back on. That grabs onto the transmission and pushes on the fork. Now, if we look at it up close, you can see that the slave cylinder is held on by 2 bolts, and it pushes on the clutch fork on the opposite end. You want to push on this thing by hand toward the clutch fork, and then thread in each of these 2 bolts by hand till they seat all the way down. You should feel no resistance as long as you're putting pressure on that slave cylinder to go over to the right. If you fail to do that and you just try to get those bolts in there by force, you're gonna ruin the threads on those bolts and in the holes, and you're gonna have to clean up the threads and clean up, you know, you're gonna have to use a tap and die set to clean that up. So I recommend not to do that. Just push it by hand. It's gonna require some force on your part. Your left arm is gonna be tired and it's probably gonna be hitting stuff around here and it's gonna hurt a little bit, but just push it all the way to the right. Drop those bolts in all the way down by hand, then take a 12mm socket, tighten it down with a wrench. Starter, really simple, just kind of annoying to get to, but you'll pop that guy in, you'll put the bolts in, not really the end of the world. With that, the only thing left to do is to put in transmission fluid. Now, the Tacoma takes 2.7 quarts of transmission fluid, and I will show you how I do that as easily as possible. So this is how I plan to get the fluid up into the transmission. I've got this little pump, found this at my local AutoZone, and I've got 3 quarts of my Redline MT90. As I mentioned, it's only 2.7 quarts, so I'll pop in a whole 2 bottles and then most of the third, and we should be good to go. Typically, when you see it start to seep out of the fill hole, you know that it's ready to go in almost any transmission. Manual transmission anyway. I don't really play around with automatics too much. Alright, so the bolt there with the yellowish tint to it is the fill plug. Take a 24mm socket and just undo it. You'll have to be in the right angle. Wow! How the... Oh, good God! How is that even possible? Okay. Looks like this will require some love with an impact. Alright, there's my fill plug. I'm going to attempt to undo it using my impact. I pray this does not end poorly for me. And of course my impact does not fit in this space. Good God, what a pain in the rear. Guess I need leverage. I have no idea why that bolt is so tight, because it should go down to just 20 foot-pounds. Guess maybe years of it being in there, plus... Good God, that is tight. I don't know what the heck is going on. I really hope it's not seized, because if it is, and I drain the fluid out, I'm dead in the water. Pretty much screwed. I really should have undone that first before I drained it, which is actually good practice. Always undo the fill plug before you undo the drain plug to make sure you can actually drain it. Wow. What a absolute nightmare. Let's see what I got that can hopefully do this. Alright, so I got that out. I used my short impact in order to turn it. I momentarily freaked out because it came out so easily and quickly. I thought that maybe I'd broken it, but yeah, this short impact right here did the trick. It fits in the space and had more than enough force to take it out. So now I'm just going to go ahead and bring this here Unfortunately, this pump doesn't properly fit the red line fluid bottles, but that's okay. I kind of just taped it on nice and tight. I'll just take this, pop it in, and start pumping. So as I suspected, my previous setup didn't really work well, and the reason is that if this little pump that I added to the top of this thing, if this little pump doesn't seal well, it obviously can't produce the suction needed to push the fluid up. So I'm obviously not going to be able to use that. So I made a quick run to the local auto parts and got myself this fluid transfer pump. This will more than do the trick, so I'm going to go ahead and just set that up, and I'll show you guys how I put the transmission fluid in. Alright, so let's take another stab at this, shall we? Take my fill plug out. Got my fluid transfer pump. Set that up in here. And take a stab at that, and hopefully we don't make a mess. This fluid is probably thicker than what this pump is really meant for, because I'm getting quite a workout. But it's working, so. Drain that bottle out pretty quick. Alright, let me get the other two bottles. Alright, here goes bottle number 2. Make sure we're still nice and seated in here, and there goes nothing. Bottle number 2. That's feeder bottle 3. And we should be pretty much there. Won't even need all of bottle 3. As I've mentioned, it's 2.7 quarts, so we'll just see the fluid start to overflow from the fill port, and then we'll stop what we're doing so that we don't make a massive mess in my garage. See if we can catch that on camera. Now, I'm not seeing any seepage. It could be because the truck's at an angle, but I also realize that there's a good bit of fluid that's getting trapped in just the pump, and even the pump is leaving some at the bottom. So it is also possible that I have some losses, which account for it not going all overboard, but that's fine. That means I'll get to 2.7 without, you know, overfilling. Oh, there we go. There we go. It's seeping up to the fill port, so now we can stop. So let's wipe that down. Put in my fill plug. Oil that came out of there will lubricate those threads. Now I just gotta put that down to 20 foot-pounds. Now, what's funny is the manual, the Haynes manual, only gives you the torque for the fill and drain plugs of the automatic transmission and doesn't mention the manual. For the manual, I would assume it's probably not much more than 20, because this is the type of bolt that you don't have to like manhandle. You just tighten it down snug and it will seal. Please don't abuse of this or you'll have to like impact it next time like I had to. It's one of the things when you start out in auto mechanics, especially when you're younger, you think you gotta like crank the heck out of all of these bolts, and that's not necessarily true. You should only ever torque them to what you're supposed to torque them to. That's it, 20 foot-pounds, done. Now I'll just bolt this thing down and we can put the wheels on and take the truck for a spin, see if this worked. Otherwise, I have a long weekend ahead of me. Yeah, I'm laughing now, but it's no laughing matter. Taking the transmission back down will really suck. Alright, everything is set up and should be working, so I'm gonna go ahead and try turning her on and let's see what happens. Of course, it's been disconnected for a while, so it might give me some trouble. So I struggled to get the truck on. I was freaking out a little bit. Checked the fuel pump relay, checked a bunch of fuses, checked the EFI relays, and you know, a few times I managed to get it on, but it would turn on with extremely low idle and it would shut off right after. And it came to me that typically when this truck has had the negative disconnected or you pull the EFI fuse, for whatever reason the ECU acts as if it's lost its calibrations, and you would have to drive it till it warms up. And once it's warm, it would start running normally. So what I did was I got it to turn on at that extremely low idle, and then I just gave it some throttle very, very gradually, and sure enough, it was able to rev up. So then I held it at varying revs until it got up to temperature, and now it's idling fine. Which is a really annoying thing, but at least my truck's working, man. I can't complain. So let's go for a maiden voyage, shall we? And it kind of sucks because I've got the K24 in the back of the truck and I don't have a hoist or engine stand to take it off, so K24 is going along for the ride. Funny part is, now that the truck is running, we have to see if the clutch is actually working. Which I really pray that it is, because my clutch pedal feels shockingly soft. I hope that that means the new clutch is just that soft and not that my hydraulics have gone to crap. Looks like it's going. Let's roll out of the garage. So looks like all this is working as it should. The only downer is, of course, I've got this K-series back here, so I can't really push it. But God, is it easy to drive. Wow, is this clutch pedal soft. It feels like a factory clutch. I can't believe this one can hold 300 horsepower. That alone is impressive. But yeah, it's so soft. It's just like factory. I honestly thought there was something wrong with my clutch hydraulics. When I first pushed the pedal, I was like, oh no, something else went wrong, or I've got to bleed the sling. Nope. Just that much softer. Feels great. Considering that the other clutch only held up to 350, this one's rated for 300. I mean, for the comfort that I've gained, I'll gladly give up the extra 50 horsepower, because I don't even intend to make that much power in this truck anyway. Alright, so this monster finally runs. She's got a good clutch, good brakes, good air conditioning. I'm so excited that I can finally start to daily drive this thing. Now all I've got to do really is clear coat my hood, and then eventually I'll also repaint the truck because obviously she looks a little worse for wear. But other than that, she's mechanically sound, and I'm super excited to be able to drive this thing around again and save some money on gas because gas prices are idiotic right now. So that's also making me really happy. If you guys have enjoyed this video and enjoyed the series, feel free to like, subscribe, hit that notification bell so you're notified when I post up a new video. Thank you so much for watching and coming along this journey with me. It's been a difficult one, and I've not been able to film as much detail as I would have liked, but if you've still followed along, just want to thank you. If you have any feedback, any comments, feel free to leave that in the comment section. And once again, thank you for watching.